I was sitting across from my husband in a glass-walled boardroom when he finally stopped smiling. Not the charming, confident smile he used to wear in public, but that thin, nervous one I had never seen in 32 years of marriage. "Angela, you're on their legal team," he asked, his voice barely steady. I folded my hands over the file in front of me, the same hands he once said were too old to start anything new. "You said my night classes were a joke, Richard," I replied quietly. Funny how they brought me here, and for the first time in decades, he had nothing to laugh about. If you've ever been underestimated or made to feel invisible, I'd really love to hear your story. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if this speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe because this story is just getting started. I used to believe that love, if you gave it enough years, would settle into something safe, something quiet, something unbreakable. 32 years with Richard Coleman taught me that I was wrong. When we first met, I was 23 and working as a receptionist at a small freight office in Chicago. Richard wasn't the CEO back then. He was just a sharp, ambitious man with rolled-up sleeves and big ideas he talked about like they were already real. "You're going to see," he told me once, leaning over my desk with that confident grin. "One day, I'll run my own company." And I believed him. I believed in him more than I believed in myself. Back then, he used to notice everything about me. The way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was nervous. The way I always double-checked paperwork because I was afraid of making mistakes. He used to call me steady like it was something rare and valuable. "You keep me grounded, Angela," he said, once holding my hand across a cheap diner table. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I held on to that sentence for years. Maybe too many. We got married when I was 26. It wasn't a big wedding, just close family, a small church, and a promise that we would build something together. And we did, or at least I thought we did. When Richard decided to start his own logistics company, it wasn't glamorous. There were no investors at the beginning, no fancy office, just a borrowed desk in a cramped warehouse and a phone that rang more with problems than opportunities. That's when I made my first quiet sacrifice. I gave up the idea of going back to school. I had been accepted into a community college program, business administration. It wasn't anything extraordinary, but it was mine. Something I wanted for myself. Richard looked at the acceptance letter one night and sighed. "Now's not the time," he said. "I need you with me, just for a few years until things stabilize. Just a few years." That's what he said. So I folded the letter, put it in a drawer, and never mentioned it again. Instead, I helped him build his company. I answered calls, handled invoices, kept track of shipments, and even drove across town sometimes to fix problems when drivers didn't show up. I learned everything on the job not because I had to, but because I wanted to support him. Because I believed in us, and for a long time, it felt worth it. The company grew. Slowly at first, then faster. Richard became more confident, more respected. We moved out of our tiny apartment into a real house, then a bigger one, then the kind of neighborhood where people didn't ask what you did. They just assumed you were successful. We had 2 children. Emily came first, quiet, thoughtful, always watching the world like she was trying to understand it before speaking. Then Jason. Loud, energetic, full of questions and endless energy. I poured myself into raising them. School lunches, soccer practices, parent-teacher meetings, late nights waiting for fevers to break. I was there for all of it. Richard was there less and less. At first, it made sense. He was building something important, something that would secure our future. "That's why I'm doing this," he used to say. "For you, for the kids." And I believed that too. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment I could point to and say, that's when everything changed. It was smaller than that, quieter. Richard stopped asking about my day. Then he stopped listening when I answered anyway. Dinner conversations became shorter. Then they became one-sided. Then eventually they disappeared altogether. He would come home late, loosen his tie, and head straight to his office without even looking at me. Long day, he'd mutter, and that was the end of it. I told myself it was temporary. That once the company reached a certain level, things would slow down. That he would come back to me the way he used to. But success didn't slow him down. It changed him. By the time he officially became CEO, the man I married felt like someone I only recognized in old photographs. He was still charming in public, still confident, still the man everyone admired. But at home, I was an afterthought. I remember one night sitting across from him at the dining table. I had made his favorite meal-roasted chicken with herbs just the way he used to love. He barely touched it. "Something wrong?" I asked. He shrugged, scrolling through his phone. "I had a late lunch. That was it." "No, thank you?" "No, this looks good." Nothing. I stared at the plate I had spent an hour preparing and felt something inside me shrink. Not break, just shrink. Over the years, those small moments piled up, and I adjusted. That's what I did best. I adjusted my expectations, adjusted my voice, adjusted how much space I took up in my own home. If he interrupted me, I stopped talking. If he dismissed my opinion, I told myself it didn't matter. If he forgot something important to me, I convinced myself I was being too sensitive, because that was easier than facing the truth that I was slowly disappearing in my own life. Our children grew up and moved out. Emily settled in Seattle, building her own career. We talked occasionally, but her life was full, and I didn't want to burden her. Jason stayed closer, but he was busy in his own way. And if I'm being honest, he had learned more from his father than from me. He admired Richard. I don't think he ever really saw me, so it became just the two of us in that big house. Two people who used to know everything about each other, now living like polite strangers. Some nights, I would sit in the living room alone, the television playing quietly in the background, just to fill the silence. I would think about the girl I used to be. The one who had dreams. The one who had plans that didn't revolve around someone else. And I would ask myself a question I didn't know how to answer. When did I stop being her? When did Angela Coleman become just Richard's wife? I didn't realize it then, but that question was the beginning of everything. The moment something inside me started to wake up. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet voice that refused to stay silent any longer. And soon it would lead me to a decision that would change everything. It's strange how you can live inside a life for decades and still feel like a guest. That's how it started for me. Not with a fight, not with betrayal, but with silence. I remember one morning standing in the kitchen pouring coffee into 2 cups out of habit. Richard was already dressed, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up. I was thinking, I said, carefully placing his cup in front of him, maybe we could visit Emily next month. It's been a while. He didn't even pause. I've got meetings, he said flatly. Next month? I repeated softly. I said I'm busy, Angela. That was it. Conversation over. Like I had asked something unreasonable. Like I had taken up too much space. I nodded, even though he wasn't looking, and sat down across from him. We drank our coffee in silence, the sound of his phone notifications filling the room, instead of words. That moment stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because of what he said, but because of how easily he dismissed me. Like my voice didn't carry weight anymore. And once I noticed it, I couldn't stop noticing it. It was everywhere. Small things, constant things. The way he would interrupt me mid-sentence. The way he would explain things to me like I was slow. The way he would make decisions without asking for my opinion and then act surprised if I disagreed. One evening, Jason came over for dinner. I had spent the afternoon cooking lasagna garlic bread, the kind of meal that used to bring everyone to the table when the kids were younger. Jason walked in, hugged me quickly, and headed straight to the living room where Richard was watching the news. "Hey, Dad," he said. "Hey." Richard replied, his tone instantly warmer than anything he had used with me all day. I stood in the doorway for a moment watching them, listening. Jason started talking about his job, a new opportunity, something he was excited about. Richard leaned forward, engaged, asking questions. "That's a smart move," he said. "You've got to think long-term. Build leverage." I smiled faintly. That used to be me. I used to be the one he talked to like that. Later at the dinner table, I tried to join in. "That sounds really interesting, Jason," I said. "Have you considered Richard cut me off?" "He's got it handled," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "He doesn't need to overthink it." Jason chuckled. "Yeah, Mom, it's pretty straightforward." I went quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized it didn't matter if I did. The conversation moved on without me, like I had never spoken. I sat there, smiling politely, nodding at the right moments, playing the role I had perfected over the years. Supportive, present, invisible. That night, after Jason left, I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. The water ran longer than it needed to just to fill the silence. Richard walked in, grabbed a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. "You didn't have to make such a big meal," he said. I turned slightly. "I wanted to." He shrugged. "Just seems like a lot of effort." A lot of effort. That's what 30 years had become. Effort. Not love, not care. Just effort. I dried my hands slowly, trying to steady the feeling rising in my chest. "Do you think I do too much?" I asked quietly. He frowned, like the question annoyed him. "I think you overcomplicate things," he said. "Everything doesn't have to be such a big deal." I stared at him. "I made dinner, and I said you didn't have to." There was a pause, a long one, the kind that feels heavier than words. "I used to," I said softly, "do things because you appreciated them." He let out a short laugh. "Angela, come on. We're not in our 20s anymore." No, we weren't. And somehow that had become his excuse for everything. For not trying. For not caring. For not seeing me. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while he slept beside me, his breathing steady, unaffected. I turned my head slightly and looked at him. This man I had built a life with. This man I had sacrificed for. This man who used to look at me like I was the most important person in his world. Now I wasn't even part of the conversation. I tried to remember the last time he had asked me a real question. Not what's for dinner, not where are my keys, but something that meant he cared about what I thought. I couldn't. And that realization hit me harder than anything he had said. Because it wasn't anger I felt. It was emptiness. A quiet, hollow space where something used to live. The next morning, I woke up before him. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, the house still quiet, and let myself think. Really think. Not about him, not about the kids, not about what needed to be done that day, but about me. And that question came back again. The one I had been avoiding. Who am I without all of this, without being someone's wife, without being someone's mother, without adjusting myself to fit into everyone else's life? I didn't have an answer. And that scared me more than anything, because it meant I had spent so many years being needed that I had forgotten how to need something for myself. I got up, walked to the living room, and stood by the window. The morning light was soft, quiet, almost forgiving. For a moment, I closed my eyes, and I imagined something different. Not a big change, not a dramatic escape, just a version of myself that wasn't shrinking. A version of myself that spoke without hesitation, that made decisions without asking permission, that existed fully. When I opened my eyes, the feeling didn't disappear. It stayed. Small, but steady. And for the first time in years, I didn't push it away. I didn't tell myself it was unrealistic. I didn't dismiss it the way Richard dismissed me. I held on to it, carefully, like something fragile, because deep down I knew. That feeling was the beginning of something I didn't fully understand yet, but something that would change everything. The idea didn't come to me in some dramatic, life-changing moment. It came quietly, almost by accident. I was at the grocery store, standing in line, half listening to the cashier talk to the woman in front of me. My mind was somewhere else, replaying the same thoughts over and over, until something on the bulletin board near the exit caught my eye. A simple flyer, white paper, black text. Evening classes paralegal certification program. No age limit. Start where you are. No age limit. I don't know why those 3 words stayed with me. Maybe because I had spent so long believing there was one. I tore off one of the little tabs at the bottom with the phone number. I didn't even think about it. I just did it. When I got home, I slipped the paper into my purse like it was something I needed to hide. And maybe it was. That night, after dinner, after another quiet meal where Richard barely spoke, I sat in the living room, the television on, but muted. I took the paper out and stared at it. Paralegal certification. Legal work. It felt distant, like something meant for someone else. Someone younger, smarter, more prepared. Not a 58-year-old woman who hadn't been in a classroom in over 3 decades. I almost threw it away. I really did. This is ridiculous, I muttered to myself. But then that question came back again. Who am I? And for once, I didn't push it away. I picked up my phone and dialed the number. My hand trembled slightly as it rang. Admissions office, this is Karen, a cheerful voice answered. I hesitated. Hi, I said. I saw your flyer about evening classes. Wonderful. Are you interested in enrolling? Interested? The word felt too strong. Just admissions office, this is Karen, a cheerful voice answered. I hesitated. Hi, I said. I saw your flyer about evening classes. Wonderful. Are you interested in enrolling? Interested. The word felt too strong. I'm just asking, I said quickly. I haven't been in school in a long time. That's okay, she replied warmly. Most of our evening students haven't. We have people from all walks of life. I swallowed. How old are they? I asked before I could stop myself. She paused for a second. Honestly, we've had students in their 20s and students in their 70s. 70s. Something inside me shifted. Would you like to come in for an information session? She continued. No pressure. No pressure. I closed my eyes briefly. I think I would. We scheduled it for the following week. When I hung up, I sat there in silence, my heart beating faster than it should have for something so small. It didn't feel small. It felt dangerous. Not because of the class, but because of what it meant. I didn't tell Richard. Not that night. Not the next day. Not even when the information session came around. I told him I was running errands, and technically I was. Just not the kind he would understand. The campus was smaller than I expected, a community college on the edge of town. Brick buildings, simple practical, nothing impressive. But as I walked through the doors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Nervous, alive. The room for the session was already half full. Most of the people there were younger, late 20s, early 30s. Some with laptops open, some chatting casually. I hesitated in the doorway. For a moment, I almost turned around. "You're in the right place," a voice said behind me. I turned. A woman, maybe in her 60s, smiled at me. "First time," she asked. I nodded. "Me too," she said. "Figured it's now or never, right?" I let out a small, surprised laugh. "Yeah," I said. "I guess so." We sat together. Her name was Linda, recently divorced, looking for something new. As the presentation started, I found myself listening more closely than I expected. The instructor talked about the program, legal research, case preparation, assisting attorneys. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, practical, structured, something I could learn, something I could do. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Richard needed, or what the house needed, or what anyone else expected of me. I was thinking about possibility. After the session, I stood near the back, unsure of what to do next. Thinking about it, or what the house needed, or what anyone else expected of me. I was thinking about possibility. After the session, I stood near the back, unsure the session. I stood near the back, unsure of what to do next. Thinking about it, Linda asked. I nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can keep up," I admitted. "It has been a long time." She smiled. "You showed up of what to do next." Thinking about it, Linda asked. I nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can keep up," I admitted. "It's been a long time." She smiled. "You showed up," she said. "That's already more than most people do." I looked around the room. People were signing forms, asking questions, taking steps forward. And I realized something. If I walked away now, nothing would change. I would go back home, make dinner, sit across from Richard, stay quiet, stay small. And 10 years from now, I would still be asking the same question. Who am I? I took a deep breath. "I think I want to enroll," I said. The words felt strange, unfamiliar, but also right. The process wasn't complicated. Forms, payment plan, class schedule, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. I signed my name at the bottom of the enrollment form. Angela Coleman. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I was signing something for myself. Not for the family, not for Richard, for me. When I got home that night, Richard was in his office door, slightly open, talking on the phone. "I don't care what it takes," he was saying. "Just fix it." His tone was sharp, impatient. I paused for a moment, listening. There was something different about his voice, tension. But I pushed the thought aside. I had my own secret now. Something that belonged only to me. The first class was the following Tuesday. All day, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. I kept checking the time, my stomach tightening as the evening got closer. At 5:30, I stood in the bedroom staring at my reflection. "You can do this," I whispered. I grabbed my bag, new notebook pens, everything neatly arranged, and headed toward the door. Richard was in the kitchen. "Where are you going?" he asked without looking up. My heart skipped. "I have something to do," I said. He glanced at me briefly. "At this hour? It's just something I signed up for." He frowned slightly. "What kind of thing?" Where are you going? He asked without looking up. My heart skipped. I have something to do, I said. He glanced at me briefly. At this hour, it's just something I signed up for. He frowned slightly. What kind of thing? I hesitated. Just for a second. Then I said it. A class. He stared at me for a moment. Then he chuckled. A class, he repeated. I felt my chest tighten. Yes. What kind of class? Paralegal studies. There was a pause, and then he laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. Enough to make something inside me shrink just a little. You, he said. Angela, come on. I held his gaze. I start tonight. He shook his head, still smiling like it was a harmless joke. All right, he said. Have fun, have fun. Like it was a hobby, like it didn't matter. I nodded once, turned, and walked out the door before I could change my mind. As I got into my car, my hands trembled slightly. Not because of him, but because of what I had just done. For the first time in years, I had chosen something for myself. And whether he believed in me or not, I was going. The first few weeks, Richard treated my classes like a phase, something temporary, something harmless. He didn't ask about them, didn't show interest, didn't care. And strangely, that was easier to handle than what came next. Because indifference hurts quietly, but ridicule, that cuts deeper. It started small. One night, I came home later than usual, my bag heavy with notes and case studies. Richard was in the living room watching television with a glass of whiskey in his hand. You're late, he said without looking away from the screen. Class ran over, I replied, setting my bag down carefully. He glanced at it. All that for what exactly? I paused. Paralegal training? I said calmly. He smirked. Right, just one word. But the way he said it made it feel like a joke. I didn't respond. I went upstairs, changed, and sat at the desk in our bedroom to review my notes. I told myself it didn't matter what he thought. I told myself I was doing this for me. But words have a way of staying with you, especially when they come from someone who used to believe in you. A few days later, things got worse. We were invited to a dinner at the home of one of Richard's business partners, Michael Turner. These were the kinds of events I used to enjoy. Polished conversations, familiar faces, a sense of belonging. That night felt different. From the moment we arrived, I could feel it. Richard was in his element, laughing, networking, moving through the room like he owned it. I stayed close at first, smiling politely, nodding when needed. Then someone asked me a question. So, Angela, what have you been up to lately? A woman named Claire asked, sipping her wine. Before I could answer, Richard spoke. She's back in school, he said, amused. Oh, Claire turned to me, curious. That's wonderful. What are you studying? I opened my mouth. Paralegal, I said. Richard let out a short laugh. Yeah, he added. Night classes. Something about the way he said it made the table quiet. Not impressed, not supportive, just entertained. Really? Michael said, raising an eyebrow. That's quite a shift. It's just something to keep busy, Richard replied before I could speak again. You know how it is. I felt my chest tighten. No, I said, softly. It's more than that. Richard glanced at me, surprised. It's something I want to do? I added, my voice steady but quiet. There was a brief pause. Then someone changed the subject. And just like that, the moment passed. But the damage didn't. The rest of the evening I felt it. The subtle looks, the polite smiles, the quiet assumption that what I was doing didn't matter. That I didn't matter. On the drive home, the silence between us was heavy. You didn't have to make it sound like a big deal, Richard said finally. I stared out the window. I didn't, I replied. You corrected me, he said, in front of everyone. I told the truth. He sighed. Angela, it's a hobby. You don't need to act like it's some major life decision. That word again, hobby. Like it was knitting or gardening. Something small, something insignificant. I turned to him. It matters to me, I said. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the road. That's fine, he said. Just don't expect anyone else to take it seriously. That was the moment. The one that stayed with me. Not because he was angry, but because he wasn't. He was certain that I would fail. Certain that this wouldn't go anywhere. Certain that I wasn't capable of more. When we got home, I went straight upstairs. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my hands. You're overreacting, I whispered to myself. But I knew I wasn't. Because this wasn't about one comment or one night. It was about years of being dismissed, years of being reduced to something smaller than I was. And now when I was finally trying to grow again, he was the one holding me back. The next class, I couldn't focus. My professor was explaining legal procedures, something about case documentation, but my mind kept drifting. To Richard's voice. It's a hobby. You don't need to act like it's a big deal. I clenched my pen tighter than I should have. Angela. I looked up. Professor Brooks was watching me. You all right? He asked. I nodded quickly. Yes. Sorry. Stay with me, he said gently. You're doing well. Don't lose that. Don't lose that. I took a breath, and for the first time, I realized something important. Richard wasn't just doubting me. He was shaping how I saw myself. And if I let that continue, I would quit. Not because I couldn't do it, but because I had been convinced I couldn't. That thought scared me, more than anything, because it meant I had a choice. I could listen to him, shrink back, return to the version of myself that asked for permission to exist. Or I could keep going, even if no one believed in me, even if he laughed. That night when I got home, Richard was already asleep. I stood by the bed for a moment watching him. The man who once told me I kept him grounded. The man who now made me feel like I was floating with nothing to hold on to. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. What I felt was something quieter, stronger, resolve. I'm not stopping, I whispered. Not to him, to myself. Because for the first time in a long time, this wasn't about being a good wife or keeping the peace. This was about proving something, not to Richard, but to me, that I wasn't done, that I wasn't too late, that I wasn't small, and no matter how many times he laughed, I was going to keep going. The first month nearly broke me, not because the material was impossible, but because I wasn't used to being bad at something anymore. At home, I knew every routine, every expectation, every role. In class, I was starting from zero. The first assignment I turned in came back covered in red ink. Corrections, notes, questions. I stared at it longer than I should have. This is normal, Professor Brooks said when he handed it back. You're learning. I nodded, but inside I felt something familiar creeping in. Doubt. The same quiet voice Richard had planted in my head. You're too late. You're not built for this. I went home that night and sat at the kitchen table, my notebook open, staring at the same page for almost 20 minutes. I couldn't focus. Every sentence I wrote felt wrong. Every idea felt small. You're overthinking it, I whispered to myself. But that didn't help. Around 10 p.m., I heard Richard walk in. He glanced at me, then at the papers spread across the table. Still at it, he asked. I nodded. Yeah. He poured himself a drink, leaned against the counter, and watched me for a moment. You know, he said casually, you don't have to push yourself this hard. I looked up. I'm fine. He shrugged. I'm just saying, it's not like this is leading to anything serious. There it was again, that quiet dismissal. Not loud, not aggressive, just constant, like a slow leak. I closed my notebook. I want it to lead somewhere, I said. He raised an eyebrow. At our age, the words hit harder than he probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as he intended. I didn't answer, because if I did, I wasn't sure I could keep my voice steady. Instead, I picked up my papers and walked upstairs. That night, I didn't study. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. Every correction, every mistake, every word Richard had said. And for the first time since I started, I thought about quitting. It came quietly, like relief. You don't have to do this. You can go back to what's comfortable. You can stop feeling like this. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket closer. Maybe he's right, I whispered. Maybe this was too much. Maybe I was trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Maybe I had waited too long. The next morning, I didn't open my books. I moved through the house on autopilot. Coffee, laundry, dishes. The same routine that had defined my life for years. And it was easy. Familiar, safe, but something felt off. Like I had already stepped backward before even making a real decision. By afternoon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. That quiet voice from before. The one that had started this whole thing. It was still there. But now it sounded different, stronger. Are you really going to stop because it's hard? I sat down at the kitchen table again, staring at the same notebook, the same red ink, the same doubts. And I realized something. This wasn't new. I had felt this before, when I gave up college years ago, when I told myself it wasn't the right time, when I chose someone else's dream over my own. And look where that had led me, sitting here, wondering who I was. I picked up my pen. Not this time, I said out loud. The words surprised me, but they felt solid. Real. Not this time. I opened my notes and started again, slowly, line by line, not perfect, not confident, but consistent. That evening, I went to class, and something changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. I started asking questions, small ones at first, clarifications, then more. Professor Brooks noticed. You're engaging more, he said after class. I'm trying, I replied. He nodded. That's what matters. Trying, not being perfect, not knowing everything, just showing up. Every class after that got a little easier. Not easy, but manageable. I found a rhythm. Study after dinner. Review before class. Take notes. Ask questions. Repeat. There were still nights I felt overwhelmed. Still moments when I doubted myself. But they didn't last as long. Because I had something now. Proof. proof that I could learn, that I could improve, that I wasn't stuck. One evening, we had a group exercise. We were assigned a mock case and asked to organize legal documents. At first, I hesitated, watching the others move quickly, confident, but then I stepped in. "Wait," I said. "This should be filed under contract dispute, not liability." One of the younger students looked at me. "Why?" I pointed to a clause. "Because of this. It changes the classification." There was a pause. Then he nodded. "Yeah, you're right." It was a small moment, but it stayed with me, because for the first time, I didn't feel behind. I felt capable. When I got home that night, Richard was in the living room again. Same chair, same glass, same routine. "How was your class?" he asked, almost absent-mindedly. I hesitated. Then I answered. "It was good." He nodded, not really listening. "Learn anything useful?" I studied his face for a moment, and then I said something I hadn't said before. "Yes." Just one word, but this time, I meant it. He didn't ask more, didn't push, didn't laugh. But something had shifted. Not in him, in me. Because his opinion didn't land the same way anymore. It didn't carry the same weight. It didn't define the moment. I went upstairs, sat at my desk, and opened my notebook. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. And as I read through my notes, I felt it again. That quiet, steady feeling. Confidence. Not loud, not arrogant, just present. I wasn't there yet, not even close. But I was no longer at the beginning either. And for the first time in years, I wasn't standing still. I was moving forward. Even if no one else noticed, even if no one else believed in it. I did, and that was enough. For now. By the third month, something unexpected happened. I stopped waiting for Richard to notice. It sounds small, but it changed everything. Before every class, every assignment, every late night studying, there was always a part of me hoping he would ask, hoping he would see me, hoping he would say something, anything that sounded like support. But he didn't. And slowly, I stopped expecting him to. That's when I started seeing things more clearly. Not just about myself, but about him. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. Class had been canceled, so I decided to surprise him. I picked up takeout from his favorite restaurant, something we used to do on Fridays when life felt simpler. When I walked in, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I set the food down in the kitchen and walked toward his office. The door was slightly open. "We can't let this go public." Richard was saying, his voice low but tense. I paused. Not intentionally, just instinct. "Handle it," he continued. "I don't care how." There was a pause. Then he added, sharper this time. "No paper trail." Something in my chest tightened. No paper trail. I stepped back before he could see me and returned to the kitchen. By the time he came out, I was unpacking the food like nothing had happened. "You're home early?" he said, surprised. "Class was canceled," I replied. He nodded, distracted. "I brought dinner," I added, forcing a small smile. He glanced at the containers. "Oh, thanks." No warmth, no curiosity, just acknowledgement. We ate in silence, but my mind wasn't on the food. It was on what I had heard. No paper trail. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but I knew enough to understand it wasn't good. The next few days I started noticing more. Not obvious things, subtle ones. The way Richard took more calls behind closed doors. The way he lowered his voice when certain names came up. the way he seemed on edge. It reminded me of the early days of the company, before everything stabilized, before success. But this felt different, more controlled, more intentional. At class, we had just started learning about corporate liability, fraud, compliance, documentation, the kind of things that companies get in trouble for, the kind of things that require careful records, paper trails. That phrase echoed in my head. One evening during a lecture, Professor Brooks said something that stuck with me. Most corporate misconduct isn't dramatic, he explained. It's quiet. It's hidden in paperwork. It's in what's missing. Not just what's there. What's missing. I wrote that down, underlined it twice, and suddenly, everything felt connected. I wasn't just learning theory anymore. I was starting to see patterns, real ones. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I asked Richard a direct question. We were sitting in the living room, the television playing in the background. "Is everything okay at work?" I asked. He glanced at me. "Why wouldn't it be?" I hesitated. "You seem stressed." He let out a short laugh. "It's business, Angela. There's always something." I nodded, but I didn't drop it. "You mentioned something the other day," I said, carefully. "About not leaving a paper trail." His expression changed. Just slightly. But enough. "Were you listening to my calls?" he asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was sharp. "I didn't mean to," I said quickly. Then don't," he cut in. The room went quiet. "I was just asking," I said softly. "And I'm telling you," he replied, his voice firm, "it's none of your concern. None of your concern." The words landed heavier than usual. Not because they were new, but because this time I knew something he didn't expect. I knew enough to question him, and he didn't like that. "I'm your wife?" The words landed heavier than usual. Not because they were new, but because this time I knew something he didn't expect. I knew enough to question him, and he didn't like that. "I'm your wife," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And this is my company," he shot back. "Let's not confuse the two." That did it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but something inside me shifted. Because for the first time, I saw the line clearly. There was his world, and there was mine, and he had made it very clear I wasn't welcome in his. I stood up. "I'm not trying to interfere," I said. "I just asked a question." "Well, don't," he replied, just like that. Dismissed. Again. But this time, it didn't shrink me. It did something else. It made me think. Later that night, I sat at my desk with my notes open. Corporate law, documentation, liability. The words felt different now, sharper, more real. Because they weren't just concepts anymore. They were possibilities. And for the first time, I wondered if Richard was involved in something he shouldn't be. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't assume the worst, but I couldn't ignore the feeling. And once it was there, it didn't go away. The next week, we had a case study, a company accused of hiding financial discrepancies. The evidence: incomplete records, missing documents, decisions made without proper documentation, no paper trail. My stomach tightened as I read through it. It felt too familiar, too close. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Linda said, nudging me. I forced a smile, just thinking. About what I hesitated. Then I shook my head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Because suddenly, my classes weren't just about me anymore. They were about understanding something bigger, something that might already be part of my life, and I didn't know what to do with that yet. That night, as I drove home, I sat in my car for a few minutes before going inside. The house was dark, quiet, peaceful on the surface, but underneath, something felt off, different. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, I realized something I hadn't considered before. This journey I had started, this thing I thought was just for me, might be leading me somewhere I wasn't prepared for, somewhere uncomfortable, somewhere complicated, somewhere that involved Richard. And if that was true, then this wasn't just about proving myself anymore. This was about truth. And I wasn't sure what I would find if I kept going. But I knew one thing. I wasn't turning back. Not now. Once you start seeing something, you can't unsee it. That was the problem. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, that I was connecting dots that didn't belong together. But every day, something new appeared. Something small. Something subtle. Something that didn't quite make sense. And it all pointed in the same direction. Richard. It began with the paperwork. One afternoon, I was organizing files in the home office, something I still did out of habit, even though he rarely asked anymore. I noticed a folder left slightly open on his desk. That alone wasn't unusual. What was unusual was how empty it looked. I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it wasn't my place. But then that phrase came back again. What's missing matters just as much as what's there. Slowly, I stepped closer. The folder was labeled Vendor Agreements. Inside, there were only a few documents. Too few. For a company as large as his, it didn't make sense. I didn't touch anything. I didn't take anything out. But I stood there long enough to feel it. That same tightness in my chest. Something wasn't right. I closed the folder and stepped away just as I heard his car pull into the driveway. That night, I couldn't focus on anything else. Not my notes, not dinner, not even the television. It was like my mind had shifted into a different mode. Observing, analyzing, questioning. At class, it only got worse. We were assigned a research project. Find a real-world case involving corporate misconduct and break it down. Identify the warning signs, the red flags, the patterns. As I read through different cases, I felt a chill run through me. Because the patterns were familiar, very familiar. Unusual financial records, missing documentation, decisions made verbally instead of in writing. Pressure to avoid documentation, no paper trail. I closed my laptop slowly. My hands were cold. "You okay?" Linda asked. I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I was scared. Not of the work, not of failing, but of what I might already be part of without realizing it. That night, I made a decision. Not a big one, not a dramatic one, just a careful step. I would pay attention. Nothing more. No accusations, no confrontations. Just observe. The next few days, I started noticing patterns more clearly. Richard was taking more meetings outside the office, unscheduled ones. He was using his personal phone more often, stepping outside to take calls, lowering his voice when I entered the room. It wasn't paranoia. It was consistency. And consistency creates patterns. One evening, I was in the kitchen when his phone buzzed on the counter. He had stepped outside. I wasn't going to check it. I wasn't going to check it. I told myself that. I meant it. But then I glanced at the screen. Just a glance, and I saw a name. Daniel Reeves. I froze. The name meant nothing to me, but something about it myself that I meant it. But then I glanced at the screen. Just a glance, and I saw a name. Daniel Reeves. I froze. The name meant nothing to me, but something about it stayed with me. Later that night, when Richard came back inside, I asked casually, "Who's Daniel?" He paused. Only for a second, but I saw it. "Just someone from work," he said quickly. "What does he do?" Richard frowned slightly. "Why?" I shrugged. "Just asking." "He handles external contracts," he replied. "External contracts." I nodded. But inside, I filed it away, because in class we had just discussed third-party contractors. How they were often used to shift responsibility, to create distance, to avoid direct liability. I didn't jump to conclusions, but the connection was there. The next week, things escalated. Not outwardly, not dramatically, but enough. I came home one afternoon and found Richard in the living room pacing. That alone was unusual. He wasn't a pacer. "What's wrong?" I asked. He stopped. Nothing. "I'm fine," he said. "You don't look fine." He ran a hand through his hair. "Just work." There it was again. That vague answer. That wall. I stepped closer. "Is it something serious?" He looked at me, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might say something real. But then it disappeared. "No," he said, "just pressure." I nodded. But I didn't believe him. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything. The folder, the calls, the name, the tension. It all felt connected. And the worst part, I was starting to understand enough to know it might not be legal. The next day in class, we discussed whistleblowers, people inside companies who notice something wrong, people who have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. "Most don't speak," Professor Brooks said. "Not because they don't care, but because the cost is too high." The cost. I wrote that down. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I wasn't ready for. If something is wrong, what do I do? The answer didn't come. Not yet. But the question stayed. That evening, as I sat at my desk, I realized something important. This wasn't just about Richard anymore. This was about me. About what I knew. About what I was becoming. Because the more I learned, the harder it became to ignore what I was seeing. And deep down, I knew this was leading somewhere. Somewhere uncomfortable. Somewhere dangerous. But also, somewhere necessary. I closed my notebook and stared at the wall for a long moment. Then I whispered something I didn't expect. If it's wrong, I won't ignore it. The words felt heavy, real, because I knew what they meant. They meant that if I kept going, if I kept learning, if I kept paying attention, I might reach a point where I couldn't turn back. Where staying silent would make me part of it. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I could live with that. Graduation didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was no grand moment, no dramatic applause that erased everything I had been through. Just a small auditorium, folded chairs, a handful of people who had fought their own quiet battles to get there, and me sitting in the second row holding a certificate that meant more than anyone in that room could possibly understand. Except one person. Angela, Professor Brooks said, walking toward me after the ceremony. "You did it." I smiled, but it wasn't loud or excited. It was steady. "Yeah," I said softly. "I did." He nodded, studying me for a moment. "You didn't just pass," he added. "You grew into it. That's rare." His words stayed with me, because they weren't about grades. They were about something D-grades. They were about something deeper. Something I hadn't even realized was happening. I wasn't just learning a new skill. I was becoming someone new. Or maybe someone I used to be before I gave it up. Linda hugged me next. "I told you, Per," something I hadn't even realized was happening. I wasn't just learning a new skill. I was becoming someone new. Or maybe someone I used to be before I gave it up. Linda hugged me next. "I told you," she said with a grin. "Now or never." I laughed quietly. "You were right. We took a picture together. Nothing fancy. Just proof that we had both taken a step forward. And then it was over. People left. Chairs folded, lights dimmed, and just like that, I walked out into the evening air, holding a piece of paper that represented months of work, years of silence, and a lifetime of quiet sacrifices. I drove home slowly, not because I wasn't excited, but because I didn't know what waited for me there. When I walked in, the house was exactly as I had left it, still, quiet, unchanged. Richard was in the living room. Same chair, same posture, same routine. He glanced up briefly. "You're back," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." There was a pause. He looked at me, then at the folder in my hands. "That today?" he asked. "Graduation." That was his word for it. That today. "Yes," I replied. He nodded once. "Good," he said. "Good." That was it. No congratulations. No questions. No acknowledgement of what it took to get there. Just good. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have. Waiting. Not for something big. Just something real. But it didn't come. So I nodded back. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." I went upstairs, placed the certificate on my desk, and sat down. For a long time, I just stared at it. Angela Coleman, paralegal certification. It looked official, complete, final. But instead of feeling finished, I felt like something was just beginning. That night, I didn't feel hurt. Not the way I used to. Richard's reaction didn't land the same way anymore. Because I wasn't doing this for him. I wasn't waiting for his approval. I had already proven something. To myself. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of energy. Not excitement, not nervousness. Something quieter. Purpose. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop. Job listings, legal assistant, paralegal support, entry-level positions. I read through them carefully. Requirements, experience, expectations. Some of them felt out of reach. Some of them felt possible. And for the first time, I didn't immediately tell myself no. I applied to 3 positions that morning. Simple resumes, short cover letters, nothing impressive, but honest. By the time I closed my laptop, my hands were slightly shaky. Not from fear, from possibility. That evening, Richard noticed. "You seem busy," he said as I walked past him. "I am," I replied. He raised an eyebrow. With what I paused, then I answered directly. "I'm looking for a job." The silence that followed was different. He set his glass down. "A job." He raised an eyebrow. With what I paused, then I answered directly. "I'm looking for a job." The silence that followed was different. He set his glass down. "A job," he repeated. "Yes." He stared at me for a moment. Then he leaned back slightly. "Doing what legal work?" I said. "Paralegal support." He let out a short breath. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Angela." I held his gaze. "I'm serious." He studied me, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't dismiss me immediately, but he didn't support me either. You really think someone's going to hire you? He asked. The words were blunt, honest, and familiar. But this time, they didn't shake me. I do, I said. He looked away, shaking his head slightly. All right, he muttered. If that's what you want. If that's what you want. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't laughter either. And strangely, that was enough. The next week passed slowly. Applications, emails, waiting. Doubt tried to creep back in. You're too old. You don't have enough experience. This won't work. But now I recognized those thoughts. They weren't truth. They were habit. And habits can be broken. 3 days later, I got my first response. An email. Simple. Direct. Harrison and Cole Legal Group. They wanted to interview me. I read it 3 times before it felt real. Then I sat back in my chair and let the moment settle. Not excitement, not celebration, just quiet confirmation. This was happening. I stood up, walked into the living room, and stopped in front of Richard. I got an interview, I said. He looked up. With who, Harrison and Cole? He frowned slightly. They're a serious firm. I know. He studied me again, longer this time. Then he nodded once. Well, he said, good luck. Good luck. Still distant, still neutral, but not dismissive. Not entirely, and that was the difference. Because for the first time, he wasn't laughing. And for the first time, I didn't need him to. The interview felt like stepping into a world I had only studied from a distance. Glass doors, clean lines, people moving with purpose. Harrison and Cole Legal Group didn't feel intimidating the way I expected. It felt precise, controlled, like every word mattered, like every detail counted. I stood in the lobby for a moment, adjusting the sleeve of my blazer. You're Angela Coleman? The receptionist asked. Yes, they're ready for you. I followed her down a hallway that smelled faintly of paper and coffee. When I stepped into the conference room, 2 people were already seated. A woman in her 40s, sharp composed, and a man, slightly older, reviewing a file. Angela, the woman said, standing. I'm Rebecca Harrison. Nice to meet you. And this is David Cole. We shook hands. I sat down carefully, placing my folder in front of me. Tell us about yourself, Rebecca said. It was a simple question, but for the first time in a long time, I had an answer. I spent most of my life supporting my family, I began. But recently, I completed a paralegal certification. I realized I wanted to build something of my own. She nodded. Why now? That question used to scare me. Now it didn't. Because I waited long enough, I said. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just measured. David glanced at Rebecca briefly, then back at me. You don't have traditional experience, he said. No, I replied, but I've learned how to pay attention and how to keep going when something matters. Another pause. Rebecca leaned forward slightly. Tell me about a time you handled something complex. I thought for a moment. Then I answered, not with something dramatic, but something real. My coursework. A case study. The way I broke it down. The way I kept working even when I didn't understand it at first. They listened, really listened, and that alone felt different. By the time the interview ended, I didn't know if I had impressed them, but I knew one thing. I had shown up as myself, not as someone's wife, not as someone trying to prove something, just me. 3 days later, I got the call. We'd like to offer you a position, Rebecca said. I didn't speak for a second. Then, yes, I said. The word came out before I could overthink it. Yes, I'd love to. It wasn't a big role, not glamorous, entry level. Support work. But it was real. It was mine. The first day was overwhelming. New systems, new expectations, new rhythms. I made mistakes, small ones, but noticeable. Double-check your citations, David told me once, sliding a document back across the desk. Got it, I said. I stayed late that evening fixing it. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted to get it right. Slowly, things started to make sense. The structure, the language, the flow of legal work. I wasn't fast, but I was careful. And in this world, that mattered. A week and Rebecca called me into her office. I've noticed something, she said. I sat down, unsure what to expect. You don't rush, she continued. That's rare. I'm still learning, I said. Good, she replied. Keep it that way. That was the first moment I felt it. Not confidence, not fully, but belonging. At home, things remained the same, or maybe they didn't. Maybe I had changed. Richard noticed the new routine. You're working late now? He asked one evening. Sometimes. He nodded. What kind of work are they giving you? Case preparation? Research? Documentation? He raised an eyebrow. Sounds tedious. It's detailed, I replied. He shrugged. As long as you're enjoying it. Enjoying it. That word felt distant. I wasn't enjoying it. Not yet. But I was growing, and that mattered more. A few weeks later, everything shifted. It started like any other morning. Emails, files, routine. Then Rebecca walked into the main workspace. We've taken on a new case, she announced. Large-scale corporate review. The room shifted, more focused, more alert. These are priority files, she added, placing a stack of documents on the table. I need full support on this. She looked at me. Angela, you'll assist with document review. My stomach tightened slightly. Of course. I took the file back to my desk, opened it, and froze. Logistics, transportation contracts, vendor agreements. My fingers went still on the page because I recognized the structure. Not exactly, but enough. Enough to feel something in my chest shift. I kept reading, carefully, line by line, trying to stay focused, trying not to jump ahead, trying not to assume. Then I saw it. The company name, Coleman Logistics Group. My breath caught. I read it again, slowly, deliberately. Coleman Logistics Group. Richard's company. The room around me faded for a moment. The sounds, the movement, everything. I stared at the page, my mind racing. This couldn't be coincidence. This wasn't just similar. This was direct. I closed the file halfway, my hands slightly unsteady. Angela. I looked up. Rebecca was standing near my desk. You all right? I swallowed. Yes. She studied me for a second, then nodded. Take your time. This one's complex. Complex. That was one word for it. I nodded again. I will. When she walked away, I looked back down at the file, at the name, at the details, at the reality sitting in front of me. This wasn't just a case. This wasn't just work. This was my life, intersecting in a way I hadn't expected, in a way I wasn't ready for. And suddenly, everything I had been learning, everything I had noticed, everything I had questioned, came rushing back. No paper trail, missing documents, external contracts. It all pointed here, to this, to him. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a moment. Then I whispered something I didn't expect to say out loud. This is real? Because it was, and there was no walking away from it now. I didn't panic. That surprised me the most. Sitting there at my desk, staring at Richard's company name printed in bold across the file, I expected fear to take over. But it didn't. What I felt instead was clarity. Sharp, uncomfortable, unavoidable. This was the moment everything I had learned stopped being theoretical and became real. I took a slow breath and opened the file again. Carefully, deliberately. If I was going to face this, I needed to do it right. Page by page, I started reviewing the documents, contracts, vendor agreements, payment records. At first glance, everything looked normal, clean, organized, professional. But now I knew better. It's what's missing, not just what's there. I slowed down, stopped scanning, started studying, and that's when I saw it. Gaps, small ones, but consistent, missing attachments, references to documents that weren't included, signatures without corresponding approvals. It wasn't obvious, not unless you were looking for it. But I was. My hands stayed steady. My breathing didn't change. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was pattern. Angela? I looked up. David was standing beside my desk. How's it going? Good, I replied, closing the file slightly. Just reviewing the vendor section. He nodded. Take your time. That's where most of the issues usually are. Issues. The word landed. What kind of issues? I asked carefully. He hesitated for a second. Documentation inconsistencies, he said. Nothing unusual for a case like this. Nothing unusual. I nodded, but inside, I knew better. Because this wasn't just a case. This was my husband's company. And these weren't just inconsistencies. They were deliberate. I continued working, quietly, methodically, not jumping ahead, not assuming, just gathering. By the end of the day, I had a list. Not written down, not formally, but in my mind. Patterns, missing approvals, third-party contractors with unclear roles, payments that didn't align with contract terms, and one name that kept appearing, Daniel Reeves. The same name I had seen on Richard's phone. My chest tightened slightly. That wasn't coincidence. That was connection. That evening, I stayed late. Not because I had to, because I needed to. The office was quieter, less movement, fewer distractions. I spread the documents out across my desk, looking for consistency, looking for truth. And slowly, the picture became clearer. Daniel Reeves wasn't just handling external contracts. He was the bridge, the one connecting missing documentation, the one creating distance, the one ensuring there was no paper trail. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. This was bigger than I expected, more structured, more intentional, and for the first time, I felt something close to fear. Not for myself, but for what this meant. For Richard, for the company, for everything built on top of it. The next morning, I walked into Rebecca's office. I have something, I said. She looked up. Go on. I hesitated, not because I doubted the work, but because I understood the weight of what I was about to say. There are inconsistencies in the vendor agreements. I continued, missing documentation, repeated patterns involving third-party contracts. She leaned forward slightly. Show me. I placed the file on her desk, opened, to the relevant sections, explained what I had seen, step by step, clear, precise. No assumptions, just facts. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she sat back, silent for a moment. Then, "This is good work," she said. The words should have felt like validation, but they didn't, not entirely. "Do you think it's serious?" I asked. She held my gaze. "Yes." No hesitation, no softness, just truth. "Well, escalate this," she added. "Carefully. Carefully." I nodded, because I understood what that meant. This wasn't just paperwork anymore. This was investigation, and I was part of it. That realization followed me home, sat with me at dinner, lingered in the silence between Richard and me. He didn't know, not yet. He was sitting across from me, scrolling through his phone like nothing had changed, like everything was still under control. "Long day?" he asked without looking up. "Yes." "Busy?" I paused, then answered, "Very." He nodded. "Good. Keeps you occupied." Occupied. That word felt different now, because I wasn't just occupied. I was involved in something that could destroy him. I watched him for a moment. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he existed in complete confidence. And I wondered, did he know? Did he understand how close this was getting? Or did he believe he was untouchable? That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Every detail, every document, every connection, it all played in a loop until one thought finally broke through. You have to decide. I sat up in bed, staring into the dark, because that was the truth. This wasn't just about work anymore. This was about choice. I could step back, pretend I hadn't seen what I saw, protect him, protect the life we built, or I could keep going, follow the evidence, do my job, even if it meant exposing him. The weight of that decision settled over me slowly. He was my husband, but this was bigger than us, and for the first time in my life, I didn't automatically choose him. I chose truth. Not out loud, not dramatically, but quietly, firmly. The next morning, I walked into the office with a different kind of focus. Not just as someone learning, not just as someone proving herself, but as someone who understood the stakes and was willing to face them. Because no matter where this led, I wasn't going to look away. Not anymore. The investigation didn't explode overnight. It tightened, quietly, like a knot pulling itself closed. Rebecca didn't announce anything. There were no meetings with raised voices, no dramatic declarations, just more work, more files, more focus. Keep everything internal, she told me one morning. No assumptions, just evidence. I nodded. Because now I understood the weight of every detail. Every document I touched felt heavier, not physically, but emotionally. Because each page wasn't just paper anymore. It was a piece of something that could destroy a life. His life. My life. I stopped thinking of it as Richard's company. I started thinking of it as a case. That was the only way I could keep going. Distance. Structure. Control. But it wasn't easy. Because every now and then I stopped thinking of it as Richard's company. I started thinking of it as a case. That was the only way I could keep going. Distance, structure, control. But it wasn't easy. Because every now and then, something personal slipped through. A familiar name. A signature I recognized. A decision that sounded like him. And every time my chest tightened just a little. One afternoon, Rebecca called me into her office again. "We've confirmed irregularities," she said. Her tone was calm, professional, but firm. Consistent patterns across multiple contracts. I nodded. I saw that. She studied me for a moment. "You've been thorough," she added. "Thank you." There was a pause. Then she leaned forward slightly. "We're bringing in external oversight." The words hit harder than anything else. External oversight. That meant escalation, legal exposure, consequences, real ones. "Do we know who's responsible?" I asked carefully. She didn't answer immediately, but her eyes told me everything. "Not yet," she said. "But we're getting close." Close. My stomach tightened, because I already knew, or at least I suspected. That night, I went home later than usual. The house was dark except for the living room. Richard was there. Same place, same posture, but something was different. He looked up as I walked in, and this time his expression wasn't neutral. It was tense. "You're late," he said. "Work," I replied. He nodded slowly. "What kind of work?" The question felt different now. Sharper, more direct. I met his eyes. "Case review." He watched me for a moment, longer than usual. Then he leaned forward slightly. "What kind of case?" There it was. The shift. Subtle, but real. I could feel it. He was asking, really asking, and for the first time, I understood why. I took a breath. "Corporate documentation," I said carefully. "Vendor contracts." His jaw tightened, just for a second, but I saw it, and that was enough. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. It wasn't casual. It was charged, like something unspoken was sitting between us. "You should be careful," he said finally. The words were quiet, controlled. But they carried weight. "Careful," I repeated. He nodded. "Those kinds of cases, they get complicated." I held his gaze. I know. Another pause. Longer this time. Then he leaned back. "Just don't get in over your head," he added. "Over your head." The words felt familiar. But this time, they sounded different. Not dismissive. Not mocking. Warning. That's what it was. A warning. And that changed everything. Because it meant one thing. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to feel the pressure. Enough to feel the risk. Enough to recognize the direction things were going. I didn't respond. Not directly. Because now every word mattered. So I nodded. "I'll be careful." That night, I didn't sleep at all. Not because I was confused, but because everything had become clear. He was involved. Not just indirectly. Not just loosely. Directly. And now, he knew I was close. The next morning, I walked into the office with a different mindset. Not cautious. Not hesitant. Focused. Because there was no more room for doubt. No more space for hesitation. This was the moment everything had been building toward. Rebecca met me at my desk. "We need to move faster," she said quietly. I nodded. "I understand. We've identified a key intermediary," she added. My chest tightened slightly. "Who?" She hesitated. Then, "Daniel Reeves." The name landed exactly the way I expected. Heavy, certain, real. I didn't react. Not outwardly, But inside, something settled. This was it. The connection. The missing link. He's central to the structure, Rebecca continued. If we can establish intent, everything else follows. Intent. That was the key. Not just mistakes, not just inconsistencies, but deliberate action. I nodded. What do you need from me? She looked at me carefully. Everything you've got. Everything. That meant long hours, deeper analysis, no room for error, and no emotional distance left. Because this wasn't just a case anymore. This was exposure. That afternoon, I sat at my desk and reopened every file, every contract, every note, every pattern, and I started connecting them. Not loosely, not vaguely, precisely. Dates, signatures, gaps, movements, and slowly, a timeline formed. Clear, structured, damaging. By the time I finished, my hands were steady. My breathing was calm. But my heart, it felt heavier than ever, because I knew what I was holding. Proof. Not suspicion, not theory. Proof. And that changed everything. Because once proof exists, there's no going back. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. Just like I had done before. But this time, the feeling was different. Not uncertainty, not fear. Resolution. Because now the truth wasn't something I was searching for. It was something I had found. And the only question left was, what happens next? Everything moved faster after that. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone outside the firm would notice. But inside, the pace shifted. Deadlines tightened. Reviews became more frequent, and conversations got quieter. Rebecca stopped speaking in general terms. Now it was specific, precise, focused. We need to establish intent, she said again during a closed-door meeting. Not a big meeting, just her, David, and me. 3 people in a room that suddenly felt smaller than it should have. We have patterns, David added. We have structure, but we need to prove awareness. Awareness, that word carried weight, because it meant one thing. We weren't just proving mistakes, we were proving choice. I sat there listening, my hands folded in front of me, trying to stay present, trying to stay professional. But inside, everything felt personal, because I knew who they were talking about, even if they hadn't said his name yet. Angela Rebecca said, turning to me, "Walk us through the timeline again." I nodded. I had gone over it a dozen times already. But now, it mattered more. I opened the file, started from the beginning, contracts initiated, vendors assigned, Daniel Reeves inserted as intermediary. Documentation begins to thin. Approvals shift from written to verbal. Records become incomplete. Payments still processed. No paper trail. I spoke calmly, clearly, every word measured, every detail grounded. No assumptions, just facts. When I finished, the room was silent. David leaned back slightly. "That's deliberate," he said. Rebecca didn't respond immediately, but I saw it in her eyes. Agreement. "We move forward," she said finally. Move forward. That meant escalation, formal steps, legal consequences. And suddenly, the distance I had created between myself and the case started to collapse. Because this wasn't just a case anymore. This was exposure. That afternoon, I was called back into Rebecca's office. Alone this time. She closed the door behind me. "Sit," she said. I did. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she studied me, carefully, like she was weighing something. "Then, there's something you need to tell me," she said. My chest tightened slightly. "What do you mean?" She didn't look away. "This company," she said, tapping the file on her desk. "Coleman Logistics." My breath slowed. "This isn't just any company to you, is it?" There it was, the moment I had been avoiding, the line I had been walking around, gone. I didn't answer right away, because there was no easy way to say it, no clean way to separate myself from it. "It's my husband's company," I said finally. The words landed quietly, but heavily. Rebecca didn't react dramatically. No shock, no surprise, just a slow nod. "I thought so," she said. Of course she did. She had seen the name, seen me, connected the dots. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Since the first day I saw the file," I replied. "And you didn't say anything. It wasn't an accusation. But it wasn't neutral either. I needed to be sure I said. I didn't want to assume anything without evidence." She held my gaze. "And now, that word felt final. Now I'm sure," I said. The room went quiet. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned back slightly. "This complicates things," she said. "I understand." "Do you?" Her tone sharpened slightly. "Because from here forward, this isn't just professional for you. It's personal, and that changes how we proceed." I nodded. "I know." She watched me carefully, then asked the question I had been asking myself for days. "Can you stay objective?" I didn't answer immediately, because the truth mattered, and I wasn't going to lie. "I can stay honest," I said. Another pause. Then, "That's not the same thing." "No." Then, "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed, "but it's what I can guarantee." She considered that, longer than I expected. Then, finally, "That might be enough." The tension in my chest eased slightly, but not completely, because this wasn't over, not even close. "We're proceeding," she said, "with or without your involvement, but I need to know if you're in." "In." The word felt heavier than anything else, because it meant choosing, not just once, but fully. I thought about Richard, about everything we had been, about everything we had become, about the silence, the distance, the warning in his voice. Then I thought about the files, the patterns, the proof, the truth. And I realized something. This wasn't a sudden betrayal. This was a slow unraveling, one that had started long before I ever stepped into a classroom. "I'm in," I said. The words felt steady, final. Rebecca nodded once. "Then we move forward." That evening, I went home earlier than usual. Not because I was done, but because I knew what was coming next, and I needed to face it. Richard was in the kitchen when I walked in. Not the living room, not his usual spot. He was standing by the counter, his back to me. When he turned around, I saw it immediately. He knew. Not everything, but enough. "You're home early," he said. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. "Yes." We stood there for a moment, facing each other. No distractions, no distance. Just truth waiting to be spoken. "What are you working on?" he asked. The question wasn't casual. It wasn't curious. It was direct. Careful. I stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. A case, I said. He nodded slowly. I figured. Of course he did. Silence stretched between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then he said it. You should walk away. Just like that. No explanation. No denial. No defense. Just a request. A warning. A plea. I held his gaze. Why? His jaw tightened. Because this won't end well, he said. For who I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. For anyone, he replied. Anyone. Not just him. Not just me. Everyone. That told me everything I needed to know. This isn't a mistake, is it? I said quietly. He didn't answer. But he didn't deny it either. And that was enough. I can't walk away, I said. The words felt heavier than anything I had said before, because they weren't just about the case. They were about us. His expression hardened slightly. You don't understand what you're stepping into. I do, I replied. More than you think. We stood there, the space between us filled with everything we weren't saying, everything we couldn't undo. And for the first time, there was no pretending left. No roles, no illusions. Just two people, on opposite sides of something neither of us could stop anymore. You're making a mistake, he said finally. I shook my head. No, I said. I'm correcting one. There's a moment when everything stops being private, when decisions leave the room, when consequences begin. That moment came faster than I expected, and slower than I feared. 2 days after my conversation with Richard, Rebecca called me in again. This time, David was already there, and so was someone new. A woman in her 50s, sharp eyes, calm posture. This is Margaret Ellis, Rebecca said. External counsel. External. The word settled heavily, because it meant one thing. This was no longer contained. Margaret extended her hand. Angela, she said. I've reviewed your work. I shook her hand. Thank you. She sat down, opened a thin folder. I'm going to ask you a few questions, she continued. I need clarity on your findings. I nodded. Of course. The questions weren't complicated, but they were precise. Timeline consistency. Yes. Pattern repetition? Yes. Third-party involvement? Yes. Any reasonable explanation for the missing documentation? I paused. Then. No. She held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. Good. Good. That word didn't feel like praise. It felt like confirmation. Based on this, Margaret said, closing the folder, we're moving forward with formal action. Formal action. The phrase echoed in my mind. What does that mean? I asked. It means subpoenas, David replied quietly. Interviews. Full investigation. Full. No turning back. I sat there, letting the weight settle. Because this wasn't just theory anymore. This was impact. Real. Immediate. Irreversible. Angela, Rebecca said gently, You don't have to be directly involved from this point forward. I looked at her. What do you mean? You've done your part, she said. You can step back now. No one would question it. Step back. The option was there. A clean exit. A way to distance myself before everything became public. Before everything collapsed. I thought about it. For a moment. A real moment. Because stepping back meant safety. It meant protecting myself. It meant not having to watch what came next, but it also meant something else. Looking away. And I had already decided I wouldn't do that. "It'll stay," I said. Rebecca studied me. "You're sure?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "All right." The next few days blurred together. Meetings, documentation, preparation. Margaret handled most of it. Strategic, controlled, unemotional. And that was necessary, because this wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about facts. And facts don't bend. The first official notice went out that Friday. I didn't see it, but I felt it. In the way the office shifted. In the quiet tension that replaced routine. In the way Rebecca closed her office door more often. And in the way my phone stayed silent. Until it didn't. It rang that evening. "Richard." I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Hello?" His voice came through immediately, tight, controlled. "They contacted us," he said. No greeting, no pretense, just truth. I closed my eyes briefly. "I know." Silence. Then, "So it's you," he said. Not a question, a statement. I didn't respond right away, because there was no easy way to answer that. "I did my job," I said finally. His breath came through the line sharp. "You think this is that simple?" "No," I replied. "I think it's exactly this complicated." Another pause. Longer. He let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You really went through with it," he said. "I didn't create this," I said. "I found it." "That's the same thing," he snapped. "No," I said firmly. "It's not." Silence again. Heavy, thick, final. Then his voice dropped, lower, colder. "You've destroyed everything." The words landed hard, because part of me still felt them, still felt the weight of what was happening, but I didn't let it change my answer. "No," I said quietly. "You did." The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, staring at nothing. Because that was it, the break, the point where there was no more us in the way there used to be. The next week was chaos, not loud, not public, but controlled chaos. Interviews began. Documents were requested. Names surfaced. Daniel Reeves was one of the first. And just like we expected, everything started connecting. Fast. Too fast. By midweek, Rebecca called me into her office again. "It's moving quickly," she said. "How quickly?" She hesitated. "Then they're preparing charges." Charges. The word felt heavy, final, against who I asked. She looked at me. "You already know?" I nodded, because I did. That night, I didn't go home, not right away. I stayed at the office longer than I needed to, sitting at my desk, looking at the files, the same files that had started everything, trying to understand how it had all come to this. But the truth was, I already knew. It wasn't one decision. It wasn't one mistake. It was a series of choices. Small ones, repeated, hidden, until they couldn't be hidden anymore. And now, they were all coming to light. When I finally went home, the house felt different. Not just quiet, empty. Richard wasn't there. His things were. But he wasn't. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, letting that reality settle. Because this was the cost. Not just of what he had done, but of what I had chosen to do about it. I walked inside slowly, set my bag down, and sat in the same chair he used to sit in, looking at the space the way he used to, trying to see it from his perspective, trying to understand. But the truth was, I couldn't anymore, because I wasn't that person anymore. The one who stayed quiet, the one who looked away, the one who accepted less. That version of me was gone. And in her place was someone stronger, someone clearer, someone who understood that doing the right thing doesn't always feel good. But it matters anyway. I leaned back in the chair, closing my eyes for a moment, and for the first time in days, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not exactly, but something close. Because no matter what came next, I knew one thing. I had told the truth, and I had stood by it. The news didn't break all at once. It unfolded. Quietly at first, then all at once. Monday morning, I walked into the office and felt it immediately. Something had shifted. People weren't just working. They were watching, waiting. Phones buzzed more than usual. Conversations stopped when others walked by. And when I reached my desk, Rebecca was already there. "It's happening today," she said. "No build-up, no hesitation. Charges are being filed this morning." My chest tightened, but I didn't react outwardly. "What happens next?" I asked. "Public record," David said from behind her. "Media will pick it up quickly. Public." That word hit differently, because until now, everything had been contained, controlled. But once it went public, there would be no privacy left, no distance, no separation between my life and the case. "Are you okay?" Rebecca asked. I met her eyes. Yes, and for the first time that answer was completely true. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I was ready. By noon, the story broke. Not dramatically, not explosively. Just a headline. Then another. Then another. Coleman Logistics under investigation. Financial irregularities confirmed. Key executive facing charges. They didn't use his name at first, but it didn't take long. By early afternoon, it was everywhere. Richard Coleman, CEO, under formal investigation. I stared at the screen for a long moment, reading the words, seeing his name, not as my husband, but as a defendant, and something inside me went quiet. Not empty, not numb, just still. Because this was the end of something, and the beginning of the end of something, and the beginning of something else. My phone rang again. I didn't need to check to know it was him, but it wasn't. It was Linda. "I saw it," she said immediately. I figured. "Are you okay?" I paused, then answered honestly. "I think so. Something else." My phone rang again. I didn't need to check to know it was him, but it wasn't. It was Linda. "I saw it," she said immediately. I figured. "Are you okay?" I paused, then answered honestly. "I think so." There was a moment of silence on her end. "That means you are," she said softly. I let out a small breath, maybe. After I hung up, I didn't go back to work right away. Instead, I sat there, looking at everything. The office, the files, the life I had stepped into, and the life I had left behind. Because they were no longer separate. They had collided. And now, only one remained. Later that afternoon, Rebecca called me into her office one last time. "It's done," she said. Done. Such a simple word for something that had taken so much. "So, what happens now?" I asked. She smiled slightly. "Now we keep working." I let out a quiet breath. Of course, because the world doesn't stop, even when your life does. "We'd like to keep you on the case," she added. I looked at her. Are you sure that's appropriate? She didn't hesitate. You've been the most consistent person on this file, she said. That matters. I nodded slowly. Because now, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't about where I came from, or who I was connected to. It was about what I did, and I had done the work. I'll stay, I said. That evening I went home again. The house was still empty, but it didn't feel the same as before. Before it felt like something was missing. Now it felt like something had been cleared. Space, quiet, room to breathe. I walked through each room slowly, not looking for anything, just noticing. The absence, the stillness, the truth. Richard never came back that night, or the next, or the one after that. And strangely, I didn't expect him to, because the version of us that existed before this couldn't survive what had happened. Not this. Not truth, what had happened. Not this. Not truth, like this. A week later, I received a letter. Formal, legal, from his attorney. I read it once. Then again, divorce proceedings. It was expected. But still, it landed. Not like a shock. More like this. A week later, I received a letter. Formal, legal, from his attorney. I read it once. Then again, divorce proceedings. It was expected. But still, it landed. Not like a shock. More like confirmation. The final line drawn. The last thread cut. I placed the letter on the table and sat down. For a long time, I didn't move. Didn't think. Didn't react. Just existed. And then something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not out of happiness, but out of recognition. Because for the first time in years, my life wasn't defined by someone else's choices. It was mine, completely, fully, unapologetically. The next morning, I went back to work. Same office, same desk. But everything felt different. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. Rebecca stopped by mid-morning. You're settling in well, she said. I looked up at her. I am. She nodded. There's something else, she added. We're expanding the legal team, and we'd like to offer you a permanent position. Permanent. The word felt steady. Real. Thank you, I said. I'd like that, she smiled. I thought you would. When she walked away, I leaned back in my chair, looking around the room, at the people, at the work, at the life I had built piece by piece, without permission, without approval, without waiting, and I realized something. This wasn't about proving Richard wrong. It was never about that. It was about proving to myself that I was capable, that I was strong, that I could choose truth, even when it cost me everything. Because sometimes losing everything is the only way to finally have something that's truly yours. And as I opened the next file on my desk, I didn't feel like someone who had lost. I felt like someone who had finally found her place. Sometimes the hardest decisions aren't about right or wrong. They're about who you choose to become. For years, I lived quietly, supporting, adjusting, accepting less than I deserved because it felt easier than facing the truth. But the truth doesn't disappear just because we avoid it. It waits. It builds. And eventually, it demands to be seen. Choosing truth will cost you. It may cost relationships, comfort, security, even the life you thought you wanted. But what it gives you in return is something far more valuable: clarity, self-respect, freedom, and the strength to stand on your own. I didn't become strong overnight. I became strong the moment I stopped looking away, the moment I chose honesty over comfort, the moment I realized that my voice mattered even if it changed everything. If you're watching this and you feel stuck, if you feel like your life is smaller than it should be, ask yourself one question. What truth are you avoiding? Because that might be the very thing that sets you free. If this story meant something to you, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and doing what's right? Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. You're not alone in your journey, and it's never too late to start again.